Welcome to Serverless Applications with AWS Lambda Hands-On. My name is Frank Kane, and I spent 9 years at Amazon.com as a software engineer and a senior manager. We spent a lot of time at Amazon building large-scale distributed systems, and I was there while Amazon Web Services was being created. Also with me is your co-instructor, Brian Tadjadin. Say hello, Brian.
Thanks, Frank. My name is Brian Tadjadin. I also spent about 9 years at Amazon, and I now work at Salesforce.com, so you can say I know a little bit about clouds. I've been an engineer at both places, and I've worked on everything from small widgets that showed up on the Amazon site to the APIs backing Salesforce.com.
Amazon Web Services is one of the hottest technical fields out there, and with good reason. It allows you to rent computing capacity across a wide variety of services where you only pay for what you need and leave the maintenance to someone else. You can even build an entire dynamic website using nothing but AWS services, and that's what this course will teach you how to do.
During this course, you'll create a simple chat application. It'll be a great introduction to a bunch of AWS services, many of which actually show up on the certification exams. We'll use S3, Lambda, DynamoDB, Cognito, and a few others that you may not have heard of.
You'll find this course is very practical in nature, and you'll learn by doing with a concrete example throughout the whole thing. If you're new to AWS, this is a great way to get immersed in it quickly with a fairly complex example. Brian, talk about what sort of person this course is for.
It'll definitely help if you're already familiar with HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. You certainly don't need to be an expert. We'll talk about the basics of the code as we go through it. But if you've never actually done any programming or scripting before, you might want to pick up a course on JavaScript. If you have done programming before, we'll talk about what's different about JavaScript compared to other programming you may have done in the past. Being new to AWS is definitely okay. We'll walk you through all of the stuff that you need to know for the services we're going to use. For equipment, you don't really need much. You just need a browser and your favorite text editor. And if you don't have a favorite text editor, we'll have a suggestion for you once we get into the course.
We're both excited to get you started in the world of AWS and building serverless applications in the cloud, so let's get started. Here at Sundog Education, we don't waste any time, so let's dive right into the world of AWS serverless apps. In this lecture, we'll cover 3 things. First of all, what the heck is a serverless application, and what are the main components of it? We'll talk about why you might use one, why you might build one, as opposed to a more traditional web server-based site, and different situations where it may or may not be appropriate to go serverless. And finally, we'll show you a demo application. We'll give you a little bit of a sneak peek of the application that you're going to build hands-on throughout the course of this course. So you're going to build up the little chat application as you work your way through this using a whole suite of AWS services, and I'm going to give you a little peek at what you're going to build. So very exciting stuff. First of all, what is serverless? What do we mean by that? Well, at a high level, a serverless app is what it sounds like. It's a web application that does not depend on you running some big monolithic web server on the back end that you need to maintain. So it's doing a lot of stuff using client-side logic and using cloud-based services in AWS to actually construct your web page, even in a dynamic manner, on the fly without actually running a web server full-time. So it's pretty cool. These things are made of 3 different components here. First of all, there is some client-side JavaScript, and the JavaScript itself is static and just downloaded from the web. But this JavaScript is what's going to actually dynamically generate the HTML content on the user's browser. So instead of depending on some server that's running on a web server somewhere to actually dynamically generate HTML, like you might have done before with JSP or Django or something else, now that logic is being done on the user's browser using JavaScript by manipulating static HTML that was downloaded to it. So JavaScript, it's not just for fancy animations and dynamic interactions. In this case, it's actually being used to take the place of what a traditional web server might do using Java to dynamically generate content for your website. And we're moving that to the client's browser, to the user's browser, to do that using browser-side, client-side JavaScript. The next component is the API. So there are some operations that still need to happen in the cloud, outside of the user's browser, usually for security reasons, if nothing else. For example, you don't want to be storing a database of users and their passwords on the browser, right? So you need some sort of an API to communicate between the JavaScript that's running on the client and the actual backend services that you need to talk to that are hopefully running in AWS somewhere. So instead of making requests to get customized HTML from the server, again, we're using JavaScript to call an API that you designed to get customized data back from the server. And that's what an API gateway provides for you. These APIs are generally RESTful web services, so they're using standard HTTP verbs such as get, post, put, delete, and patch to communicate with the backend services. So whatever backend services you might be relying on within AWS, this API gateway that AWS provides allows you a very simple and consistent way to actually communicate with those backend services just using standard HTTP requests from the client. Finally, there is the markup. That's the actual HTML that is required to render your page. And it is static and cacheable, so that comes down very quickly, and everybody gets the same thing. And anything that needs to be done dynamically is being done by the JavaScript that's also being downloaded to the site. So those are the three main parts of your serverless application: client-side JavaScript that constructs your dynamic HTML, the API gateway that talks to backend services in the cloud that you need, and the actual HTML markup that you start with that is served statically, the same thing to everybody. How do they all work together? Let's kind of walk through it here. So basically, a user will come to your site and they will be provided static HTML, CSS, and JavaScript files just loaded from the cloud, from a content delivery network that's in front of some storage service like Amazon S3. Okay, so we're not actually hitting a real web server at this point. We're just hitting Amazon's simple storage service and a CDN that's in front of it called CloudFront to actually download those files just like they're from some image server or something. Okay. Then the static parts of the page are in HTML, while dynamic parts of this page will be modified by the JavaScript that you downloaded along with everything else initially. So if there's anything you need to modify dynamically to this page, the JavaScript that you already downloaded from S3 will take care of that. Next, your JavaScript will retrieve any dynamic data or information that it needs from the API gateway. It will write the data that it received back from the API to further modify the HTML that you're presenting to the user. And, maybe the JavaScript will handle some aspects of the navigation as well for you. But the general idea is that you start with a static set of content and CSS and JavaScript. The JavaScript can then communicate with the API to actually retrieve any dynamic information it may need to reshape that page. And then it writes out the results to the end user on your browser. So interestingly, there is no web server, involved in this at all. Maybe a picture would help make it more clear. So let's take a look at this. Like I said, the actual static content, the HTML, JavaScript, and CSS, will just be stored in Amazon's simple storage service, and that's just a cloud-based service for storing files. Amazon also offers a content delivery network called CloudFront, that's a CDN for short, that sits in front of S3, and that basically accelerates requests to the files that you're hosting in S3. So the way this works is you'll upload your static files, your HTML and JavaScript, into what's called an S3 bucket. It's basically like a folder with a unique name within the larger world of S3. CloudFront will then sit in front of that and make sure that those files are distributed throughout the world to servers that are closer to your end user and accelerate the serving of those files to the end user. So that's step one. That's how all the static content gets initially to the browser. Next, your JavaScript will start hitting the API gateway, which in turn will call other services on the back end. And the glue between those are the Lambda service in AWS. So Lambda is just little snippets of code that are used to translate those API gateway requests into actual logic that involves other backend services within AWS. So for example, if you need to retrieve some data to display on your website, you might issue a JavaScript request through the API gateway to Lambda, which will then translate that to a call to DynamoDB, which is just a NoSQL database solution for storing information, like chat messages, for example. It might also communicate with the AWS Cognito service, which is just there to manage user login information. So that's a service that allows users to sign up for accounts and manage those accounts and authenticate users in a secure manner. And you might talk to other cloud services as well. You don't have to limit yourself to AWS. Maybe you want to incorporate things like the Disqus commenting system or Facebook comments. Could be anything. The sky's the limit. Whatever your JavaScript can do or incorporate or even suck in dynamically through HTML that's static, sky's the limit. You can still do whatever you want here. Maybe you want to incorporate some sort of analytics, or you could even do like an old school site counter if you wanted to. I don't think I've seen one of those in 20 years, but whatever you can dream up, there's nothing limiting you here. So why would we do this? What's the whole point of going serverless? So why not just do things the old-fashioned way? Previously, before the world of serverless apps, we could just spin up a web server running somewhere on the cloud, or your ISP that runs some HTTP service that in turn run some Java code that constructs your web pages on the fly and vends those out to the end user. And, that still works. It's still appropriate for some use cases, and we'll talk about that more. But there's a lot of advantages to going serverless. For example, if you're running a serverless application, you don't have to maintain and administer those services. Amazon's paying people to do that for you. So things like applying patches and monitoring your services and dealing with hardware failures, these are things you don't have to worry about as much because you're just running services in the cloud on hardware that's shared throughout everyone else. So the thing is, if one of the servers actually goes down, that's going to affect a lot of people, not just you, and Amazon will deal with that for you. So Amazon tries to make sure that its services remain available, and that is their problem, not your problem. You're not going to get paged in the middle of the night saying your web server went down because it ran out of memory or something, or it ran out of disk space because it had too many logs. That's now somebody else's problem, and that is huge, right? The other thing is economics. So servers don't scale granularly, and you usually can't add or remove them on demand very quickly. So if you have a new web application, chances are it's not using up 100% of the capacity on a given web server. Maybe it's using 20% or 50%, or maybe it actually fluctuates over time. And with cloud-based services, it becomes a lot easier to add and remove capacity as needed. And sometimes you don't even have to think about it. If you're actually using some cloud-based service, the scale is Amazon's problem again and not yours. So you're paying for what you use, for the capacity you use, for the actual storage space that you use, and you can do that to pay for exactly the amount of capacity and resources that you need. And that can save a lot of money because owning and maintaining an entire server can be expensive whether you're using it or not. And the world of serverless applications also forces you to create a very specific API between the front end and the back end. That's what that API layer is all about. And because you do have a well-defined API, that makes it easier to split up work between front end and back end developers. So it's a lot easier in a serverless environment to have people who specialize in the front end and people who specialize in the back end of the web application and have them work in parallel. So aren't these backend services really servers at the end of the day? I mean, S3 and the Lambda service and Cognito are all running on a server somewhere ultimately, right? Yes, but again, they're not yours. You're not the one maintaining them. You're sharing this capacity with other people, so you're only paying for the portions of those servers that you actually need, which saves a lot of money and saves you a lot of maintenance headaches. Amazon is the ones that have people with pagers that keep these services up and running, not you. And having worked at Amazon as well as Brian, we can tell you firsthand that they do, in fact, have pagers. And you don't want one. Let them do it. Now, serverless applications are not for everybody. There are both good and bad use cases for them. So on the good side, if you have a simple dynamic web application where it's all about user interaction, that's why we're using a chat application throughout this course as an example, that's a good fit. So if a lot of the content is user-specific, and you don't need a lot of search engine indexing and things like that, a serverless application can be a very good fit. What's not such a good fit for serverless applications is if you're doing a really content-rich site. You wouldn't want to build Wikipedia this way, for example. If you have a large application, that can create a poor user experience if a lot of data needs to be loaded up. And if the time to load up all that HTML and CSS and JavaScript up front for a serverless application takes a long time, then the user's going to be sitting around waiting for that all to come down while everything loads in the background, and that's a bad user experience and a slow user interface. So again, good use case, dynamic applications that are very user-focused and focused around user interaction. Bad use case would be very content-rich sites with a lot of data that you're displaying on the front end because you're going to have a hard time presenting that quickly enough to the end user. And with that, let's move to our demo application. Let's give you a little sneak peek at the chat application that we're going to build throughout this course. So here it is, guys. This is the serverless chat application we're going to build throughout this course. And again, we're going to build this using nothing but AWS services using a serverless framework. So very cool stuff, and it's a great introduction to a wide variety of AWS services. So to get started, we're just going to hit the sign up button here. And again, this is a web page that's just a bunch of static content that's coming through Amazon CloudFront, backed by Amazon's S3 or simple storage service, which is where we'll actually store that content. By hitting sign up, I'll hit some JavaScript that's going to go out and actually talk through the API gateway to Lambda and ultimately to the Cognito service, which is what AWS uses for user management. I'll clear out some of the garbage that Chrome autofill put in there. Make up a username here. Let's call it Frank Test. And my email address. Don't spam me, guys. And whatever password you want. And Cognito will automatically do the thing where it sends a confirmation code to your email address that you sent in. So I'm going to check my email here on the screen that you can't see. All right, it finally came in. Took about 5 minutes, but it did come in. There's my secret code. For one-time use, of course, I'll hit confirm. And again, AWS's Cognito service is doing all the work under the hood to make that all happen. So now that my account's been set up, I can enter my username and password. And my username was actually frank-test. And I'll re-enter my password because I don't really trust Google's autocomplete there. Hit login, and I should be in. Cool. All right, so now I can just start a new chat. So I can hit this big friendly start a new chat button. And I can select someone to chat with. So in this case, our co-instructor Brian has an account. Let's say something to Brian, shall we? And we can just start typing a message down here. Hi, Brian. This course is gonna... Oh, I can't type. This course is gonna rock. Woo-hoo-hoo. And we'll hit send, and Brian will get that. And he's gonna wonder, what the heck? I am on. And if we want to go back and check that from the other end, I can log out and sign back in as Brian. So I can say sign out. And now I'll log in as Brian. And I happen to know his password. And we can see that he received this on the other end. Oh, look, I have a chat from Frank-Test from a few seconds ago, and it says, hi, Brian, this course is gonna rock, woohoo. So there you have it. We have an actual working, very user-focused, very dynamic web application here running just using AWS services and no dedicated web server whatsoever. This is what we're going to build throughout the course, guys. It's going to be great experience in getting your hands dirty with a wide variety of AWS services and putting them together into a very full-featured chat application that really works. So, hey, maybe you'll take this and build on it and make the next Facebook Messenger or something. Who knows? The sky's the limit, and you'll be surprised at how easy it is. So, in the next lecture, let's start getting our hands dirty and start setting things up and start getting some content uploaded to S3 and vended out to the world as a web page. We'll do that next. Hi guys, Frank Kane here in our course recording studio. Thanks so much for being a part of this course. Now, depending on what platform you're watching this course on, you might actually get prompted to leave a review on what you've seen so far right after this video is done. And if so, if you think this has been a 5-star quality course based on what you've seen so far, great. Tell the world. I'd love it. But if you're not sure yet, there's going to be a big button there that says, it's too soon. Ask me later. Let me watch some more videos and form more of an opinion first. And it's totally okay to hit that. They'll just ask you again later as you've consumed more of the content of this course. Obviously, if there's something wrong with it, I want to hear about it. But just don't feel pressured by that, okay, guys? You know, you can leave a review now, you can leave a review later, whatever works for you. All right, just make sure it's a fair one. That's all I ask. And with that, let's move on.